I love doing these stats pieces, and one of the reasons why is because they allow me and you to see some of the differences and even anomalies from MBA program to MBA program. I've already covered HBS, the GSB, and Wharton. Let's take a look at Chicago Booth and its similarities to peer programs, but also some of its quirks. Chicago Booth has a reputation for rigor and is known for its Nobel laureates in finance and economics, and its number one pre-MBA industry is No, it's consulting. 27% of its class was in consulting pre-MBA. But to be fair, 26% came from financial services and PE, which is really just a few students less than consulting. Let's compare that with Wharton, another program that has a reputation for finance. 33% of Wharton's class came from one financial field or another. To be honest, like most, I thought that Booth would have drawn more significantly from this field, but for those who are asking, isn't Chicago a finance program? You now have your answer. And quick digression, if you're thinking, wait, Jeremy, when I think about Booth as a finance school, I think more about outcomes, post-MBA jobs, not inputs. Well, about a third of the class goes into consulting and a third goes into finance. So inputs and outputs are similar. Back to inputs, Booth is a lot like peer programs in that 2/3 of its incoming class comes from the big three, consulting, finance, and tech, but a surprise, 11% of its class comes from the nonprofit sector or government. And that might seem high for an alleged finance school. Only 6% of an HBS, kind of not allegedly a finance school, comes from this sector. Notably, Booth boasts that 10% of its class is from the veteran community, but some of those veterans may not have gone directly into Booth, so they might end up double counted in a way. The veteran who moves into finance before B school is kind of counted twice in those class profile stats, once as a veteran and once as a finance applicant. Still, a strong component of that 11% of its nonprofit and government group must be from the military. Booth is 35% international, with almost a quarter of its 600+ students coming from Asia and Latin America. Only about 3% of its class, or about 18 students, come from Europe. 2% or 12 students come from either Africa or Canada, and just 1%, or about 6 students, come from the Middle East. If you're from one of these underrepresented geographic regions, my guess is that they'll give your file an especially careful read. They'll be trying to cultivate individuals from these countries so that they have better representation over the long haul. Over the last 5 years, Chicago Booth has gone from 30% international to 35% international. Our guess is that it is intentional, and they're eager to continue to grow in this regard. Chicago Booth must be envious of Wharton's gender representation. Wharton achieved gender parity a few years ago and has had a slight decline since, but Wharton is now at 47% women. A recent Chicago Booth class, only 42% women. So if you're a strong female candidate, you may stand even taller at Booth, where they no doubt want that number a little higher. Chicago Booth's class is 11% first-gen college students, 9% LGBTQ+, 8% African American, and 10% Latino, all very much in line with peer schools, and they are no doubt eager to increase those numbers as well. Let's dig into some of the more traditional stats that applicants rely on to gauge whether or not they might be able to compete for a place in the class. First, GPA. You may be surprised by the range of GPAs of admitted students at Booth. 2.36 to 4.0. Did I just say 2.36? Did you just shake your head? Yes, 2.36 to 4.0 with an average of 3.6. Well, this is one student maybe at 2.36, and there may be a few others with very low GPAs, but our guess would be that that 2.36 had a lot of other strengths in his or her application and had a very high test score to offset that low GPA. I remember working with an applicant with a 2.7 GPA a few years ago, and he had a sky-high GMAT score and unique work experience, and it made the difference for him. I don't think he would have gotten in with an average or below average test score. In fact, I can say almost certainly he wouldn't have. While we're talking about GPAs, you don't need to go to an Ivy, the University of Chicago, or some other elite college to get into Booth. How many different undergraduate institutions are represented among its 632 students? What if I told you that 250 schools were represented? Would that surprise you? Well, the number's actually higher. Trick question. 319 schools represented. If you're worried about the reputation of your undergrad institution, hopefully this puts that to rest. Performance is what matters. Applicants from programs you've never heard of will get into Chicago Booth. We're only about halfway through our discussion of Chicago Booth. I should note that if you're interested in Chicago Booth, we have a whole learning about segment on Chicago Booth in our online curriculum and admissions platform, On Track by mbaMission. We go through why you should go to Chicago Booth, why you shouldn't go to Chicago Booth, the curriculum, the job outcomes, and so much more. And that's just one module out of 80 plus flexible modules that are all customized to your needs. So you won't get all 80, you'll get the ones that are just applicable to you. And we have school-specific modules on all of the top schools, both domestically and internationally. It is quite the program. I would check it out. I am actually your guide through the entire curriculum. Okay, let's get back to this video. What about test scores? First, 56% of applicants take the GMAT and 38% take the GRE. A small number of joint degree applicants take other tests. Booth's GMAT range is 590 to 780, which is about a 555 to 785 on the new GMAT, and the average GMAT score is 730, or about a 675 new GMAT score. Again, that range no doubt gives some with low test scores some hope, but that 590 applicant was not your average consultant or finance applicant. There was something special there. Meantime, the GRE range of 148 to 170 quant and 145 to 170 verbal, with averages of 163 quant and 161 verbal, well, that's just 1 point away from, again, a peer school, Wharton's 163, 162. Again, when it comes down to it, some of these statistical differences among elite and mega elite programs are surprisingly trivial. The average student at Chicago Booth has 5 years of pre-MBA experience and could no doubt fit in nicely at any other M7 program. While the program may be known for its analytical rigor, its students are no more rigorously analytical than its peers. And maybe that brings us full circle. Booth stats don't support its reputation as, quote, only a finance program. There's a lot more nuance, as you've just learned. Next up, don't miss our video on Chicago Booth versus UPenn Wharton.